From sunny St Leonard's on the south coast of the UK, this is the Keto Woman Podcast, brought to you by me, Daisy Brackenhall. Hello Keto Lovelies, welcome to a brand new episode. This is episode number 194 and I'm sharing it with my good friend and very extraordinary woman, Kim Howerton. Kim and I go back about 5 years now, and I first met her adminning in the Two Keto Dudes Facebook group. That seems like such a long time ago. Well, she has come on in leaps and bounds. She's transformed not only her body and her health, but her career as well. I'm sure you're familiar with her, but she is a fantastic keto coach and has several programs and books as well. There will be links in the show notes where you can go and find out more about her. For the time being, at least, I'm ditching the rather lengthy intro and rather just give you a quick heads up and overview about what's coming up in the episode. I'm really tempted to shake everything up, not just the format, as I've mentioned before, but also the podcast image, maybe the music. I don't know, but I got stuck in a bit of have to get everything done all at once before I can relaunch. But my good friend Terry Lance brought me back down to earth and said, listen, Daisy, if you don't just get out what you've got, it's going to be October and you're still going to be running repeats. And she is absolutely right. So I'm just bringing you some new content for now and gradually work on overhauling the rest as I go. But the most important thing is the content, isn't it? So that's the key thing for me to focus on, I think. I'm recording with the fabulous Dan and Erica tomorrow. So listen out for that. That'll be the first of the new foodie episodes. I recorded with Terry last week, and that will be the first of our new mindset episodes. So there are some new things coming, and if you've got ideas for a show, well, you know where to find me, so do let me know. Feedback is always welcome, so let me know about that as well. Everything else is ticking along. No sign of the builder this week, but his wife is expecting a baby any minute, so maybe he's been busy with that. He's also an ardent footy fan. If you follow football, you'll know that England is doing very well and is in the final on Sunday. So fingers crossed we win for a change. You might gather by my tone, I'm not a football fan, but it's hard not to get a little bit caught up in the football fever. The glasses saga goes on and on. Just had another very lengthy appointment this evening. And he now wants to refer me for a second opinion from the ophthalmologist at the hospital. Something to do with my pupils not being the same, and I can't remember exactly what. But no doubt we'll find out, although apparently waiting lists are very long, so it could be a very long time before I find out. For now, we've ditched the distance glasses, and he's working on a third prescription for the closer work glasses. So we'll see if those work. Sadly, though, it was not the answer to my headaches, as I'd hoped. He could still be right on that. It could be something that, if it had been corrected back when I was a teenager, it might have prevented a lifetime of headaches. But basically, it sounds like I'm so set in my ways and my eyes are so used to making these adjustments that it's proving a little bit too difficult to go back and correct them. Still, never mind. It was worth a try. Anyway, so much for a shorter introduction. I will leave you now to the wonderful Kim Howerton. I hope you're planning a very lovely weekend. I'm heading over to Worthing to see my mum, but also my brother and his family are coming down. So I'm really excited about seeing them. It's been a long time since I've seen my niece, so I'm particularly looking forward to seeing her. So wherever you are, whatever you're up to, have a fabulous weekend and a fabulous week ahead. Take very good care and I'll see you soon. Welcome back, Kim, to the Keto Woman podcast. It's been a long time since I've recorded, and it's been quite a while since I've recorded with you. It's lovely to see you again.
It is lovely to see you too, Daisy.
Now, as some people might know, I have been editing your podcast, Keto Life Support, and you've recorded a few episodes now talking about reverse dieting, which I found extremely interesting. So I wanted to ask you onto my podcast to talk about it. So I don't know how you want to kick off. Do you want to set the scene first? What do you think?
Sure. So I can set the scene for people that maybe haven't been following my journey and don't know the details. So I've been keto for 5+ years. And, when I initially found keto, it was sort of the most amazing thing ever in terms of really being a real change in terms of becoming metabolically healthy. And I was over the moon about it. And then I hit a stall, and then that stall just seemed to be forever. And it was a good, solid chunk of struggle. Not only was I not seeing the weight go down, I was starting to see the weight go up, and I was just panicked on some level. And then I was also just really defeated, right? Because I think for a lot of us, keto was like our 20,000th attempt to get a handle on our health and our weight. And we finally found something that worked. And then we hit a point where it's like, am I really this broken that I can only get part of the way that I want to get, and I can't get all of the way that I want to get? And
well, it's also that cycle when, it's one thing to hit a stall and not lose any more weight. But if the weight starts going back up, of course, that just throws you back to every diet you've ever done because you lose weight, then you stop losing weight, and then you gain it back and gain a bit more. So your mind is going to go back into, I'm going to just be back where I started and maybe even more. And
yeah, totally. And it was this really kind of stuck, like it was the definition of stuck. I felt like I couldn't go forward and I couldn't go back because keto was definitely the best I'd ever felt and the best results I'd ever gotten. And at the same time, there seemed to be no road forward. And I was like, what the F, right? Like, where do I go from here?
And tastes good as well, right? I mean,
right.
It's one thing struggling with the diet and you hate the food and you're sort of getting some results. But when you found something that you actually enjoy eating and it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really did look at it, as a way of life. And I was in this way of life and, and I was teaching about this way of life. And I was like, I'm committed to a certain degree of honesty. And at the same time, I didn't want to destabilize anyone that was doing well with my struggles. But then over time, I came to realize that a lot of people were struggling out there in the world of keto. I mean, not more than in other genres of trying to lose weight, but I wasn't alone in my struggle. And I did more research. I started to look into more details around what was going on with me, why this could be, what's going on with my metabolism, what's going on with what I'm eating, because I kind of reached a point where I was like, I'm not accepting defeat here. I'm gonna have to figure this out. Within the realm of possibilities was, maybe keto isn't right for me anymore. And what do I need to do? And so I had to look at all the angles and all the details. And, what I eventually came to is that I had done something that I had been assured was impossible on keto, which is I had metabolically adapted to a very low calorie index. And, it's a bit of a mind shift. So let me explain. So what I've come to learn is that metabolism is not this fixed thing. It's like a conversation, right? It's an interaction. Your metabolism is interacting with what you do, how much you do, what are you eating, what types of foods are you eating. Like, it is just like anything else in our health. It's a conversation between the actions we're taking, the input we're giving it, and then at the end, it's like there's a result. And so what was happening was over the course of my keto life or my earlier keto life was told repeatedly, you can't eat too little, starvation mode isn't the thing on keto, yada, yada, yada. And ultimately what I came to is I was eating too little for too long. And It's not the only factor, for sure. There are multiple factors in any situation where you're stalled or you're not getting the results you want. But one of them was that I had spent a long time eating a very small amount of food, for a variety of reasons, some of which were, one, keto is satiating, so you can get away with it from a experience perspective. And then two, those thoughts in your head about not eating too much, I think, are still very loud, even when you think you're ignoring them. Because I grew up with very much, it's actually kind of ironic, right? I grew up with the eat less, move more kind of mindset. And I thought that I had kind of left it behind me. I thought that I'd overcome it. And I found that it had somewhat followed me. That
more deep rooted than you thought.
Right. That thought that well, if I'm going to try to explain this, that I had inadvertently thought eating less is always better. And then over time, my body sort of grew accustomed to that. And I do have, we're not a blank slate, right? We come into everything with experience and I do not have what I would call a sort of base fast metabolism, right? So there are some truths here. I cannot eat as much as random other person maybe, right? We're all a little bit different. But at the same time, I had thought, I'm going keto. I'm totally rejecting this calorie hypothesis, right? I'm rejecting calories in, calories out, which I still do reject that it's a simple equation of calories in and calories out. But what it is, and I think what is more common than we might think, is that we think if we're told calories don't matter, well then too many calories don't matter, but also too few calories don't matter. And it's actually the second scenario that I think is biting more people in the ass in the keto community, because I run into these people all the time, who are well above 200 pounds and eating 1,000 calories a day and not seeing the results they want. Whereas if you put them on a, normal calorie chart, how much weight should you be losing? They should be dropping, weight like crazy. And so I had to look into how do I really work with this from a better perspective. And so I was able to, over the course of a year, do something called a reverse diet. Now, the reverse was not a year long, and it never is, but it's a much more cumbersome thing to say reverse and maintenance. But basically what I did is I ate more food in a slow and controlled fashion, right? I didn't just go from eating very little to a lot overnight. I went from just pushing the envelope, a little bit at a time over, this week go a little higher, then the next week go a little higher, I did that until I reached what I call the ceiling, which is the point at which you start gaining weight. Right. And so it's not too complicated. You just kind of see can I push it this far? Can I push it this far? Can I push it this far? You find your ceiling and then you stay there for a while.
And that's the trick, is to inch up slowly, not to just hit that ceiling straight away.
Right. Because one of the things that is the reason that we tend to rebound so badly when we binge, right? To compare, instead of eating more binge, I'll use those as comparisons, right? But we've been really restricted for a while. We've been eating a small amount for a while. We start eating more, but instead of doing it in a controlled fashion, we just go from eating 1,200 calories to eating 2,000 calories from Monday to Tuesday. And actually, if we've been very restricted for a very long period of time, there are certain processes in the body that assist us to gain more weight when we do that rebound, when we have that binge. Whereas now, like yesterday, I ate 1,800 calories as opposed to the 12 I'd been eating. And I don't weigh I weigh 1.5 pounds more than I did when I started the last reverse, I'll say. So I'm currently in a period where I'm eating more rather than eating less. So, yesterday, as an example, I ate about 1,800 calories versus, way back in the day, I'd eaten about 12. And you can't jump from 12 to 18 in one day, right? I had to do that in a gradual fashion. The thing that will happen there is, as I said, there are these ways that your body knows that you've been under eating for a long time. And if you blow through the gates, you just kind of have a blowout binge. And it doesn't even have to feel like a binge. In a way, I'm I ate a normal amount of food yesterday. I wasn't a binge. It was just normal eating. if you go from highly restricted to normal eating and you've been highly restricted for a long period of time, your body will not take it well. So that's, I think, what ends up happening to a lot of people and why so many people regain weight so fast. Because this is true of any restriction of food. If you're restricted for a long time and you say F it and you start eating like a normal person, your body is going to overreact rather than take it well. And so you have to kind of inch your way up as you're increasing rather than just turn the page and go full bore.
And you mentioned there that there are some mechanisms that kick in. What's the nitty gritty? What's going on there?
Yeah, there are enzymatic processes. There's also just some realities of we get very excited about food again. And so there are ways in which like our gut isn't ready for it and our body is just not quite prepped for us to be able to digest and consume quite so much food as we haven't been used to. I know it's not super scientific to say it this way, but you have to kind of sneak it in the back door, right? Like you have to.
That's what it feels like. Yeah.
You're inching up in a way so that your body isn't noticing a huge overnight shift. It's actually interesting because on the other end, you don't want to diet that way, right? Like if you're trying to reduce the amount you're eating, you don't want to go in little microscopic amounts because you do want your body to notice the shift. Humans are adaptation machines, right? That's how we survive. We adapt to different circumstances. And you want to like minimize the sweeping movements if you want to get away with something, right? If you don't want something to shift, and you have to kind of make sweeping motions when you want the noticing to happen, right? If you're trying to increase how much you eat, you want to do it in small amounts, very subtly, because you want your body to essentially pay no mind.
Yeah, because there's that theory, isn't there, when I know you don't like the term starvation mode, but when you've been under eating and your body starts, snipping off some resources, doesn't it? Start snipping off some things that are just not so important to do. So you might, start losing some hair and things like that. Isn't there the theory that if you're in that state for a prolonged period of time and you do suddenly up the calories, up the amount of food you're eating, your body doesn't quite believe that you're going to be doing that for a long period of time. So it wants to hold on to it all.
Exactly. So it's like, we may not get this surplus again. I mean,
whereas if you build it up slowly, it kind of,
trust it.
I mean, you can't put those sort of human terms on it, but it's kind of, it has some faith in you that you're going to be doing this for a long period of time.
Totally. I mean, you can think of it from an evolutionary perspective that it makes sense, right? If you're a hunter-gatherer and it's been a really rough winter and there's not a lot of food, your metabolism is designed to be adaptive to keep you alive, which means it's going to turn down everything. You're going to fidget less. You're going to move around less. You're going to just, existing will take less energy. It's going to figure out how that's going to happen. And then on that one day that you go to town and eat all this stuff, your body is like, we need to hang on to this because this may not happen again. And I'm just repeating what you said, which is, then whereas if you just go a little more and a little more and a little more, and then you're in a period of bounty and there's plenty and your body has no indications that you are in a famine any longer.
It's the opposite.
It's like, hey, I don't need to hold on to these. I don't need to do these, stupid
We can
things.
Just throw it around with abandon.
Exactly.
Give it to other people.
Right. Yeah. So the reality is, not just because, one of the things that I really want to bring up is it's not all about the weight loss, which I know we all say, right? But the reality is that when you end up in a stall, you can get hyper fixated on the weight loss. And then that stress is not helping. But the reality is that so many factors influence what our weight is going to do, which includes the quality of our sleep, how much our body just moves naturally. I'm not talking about like hardcore exercise. I'm literally talking about your willingness to get out of your chair, and will, if somebody suggests going for a walk, would you want to go or not want to go? These factors are actually influenced by how nourished you are. And if you're really, truly undernourished, your hormones will go wackadoodle. there is a lot of people in the keto community who also have thyroid problems. Now, I do not believe that the keto caused the thyroid problems. I just think a lot of people with thyroid problems seek out keto because they're looking for something to help them. And I think keto can be actually a wonderful way to eat for people with thyroid problems. I'm a person with thyroid problems. But one of the risk factors of increasing thyroid problems is chronic undereating, right? So if you're on keto and you're chronically undereating, you're still putting your thyroid at great risk, right? It's going to downregulate for you. The thyroid is one of those things that regulates our metabolism. They don't exist separately. So by eating more, you might have better thyroid function. And this explains the thing that people are like, this is not possible, right? The calorie people, and obviously now I apparently am a calorie person because I'm talking about calories, but people will say that it doesn't make sense why you might lose weight when you eat more. But it does if you look at your hormones. Like if you've been downregulating your thyroid, which can cause, I believe, something like 25 to 30% downregulation of metabolism. So if you ate more, potentially now your thyroid starts working better. Now your caloric rate goes up. The amount at which you can lose weight eating goes up. Now you're eating more but losing more because those processes that had been really slowed are coming back online. And I'm not actually suggesting that everyone who eats more will lose more weight. That's not what the reverse diet is about. It's not like, oh, I went from 1,200 calories to 1,800 calories and now I lost more weight. It's part of the healing process. I then, after doing a reverse and a maintenance period, getting my sleep, better, getting my hormones better, getting my life better, feeling better, being stronger, all of those things, I then went into a period of time where I intentionally reduced how much I ate so that I would lose more weight. And then I went back into reverse. So it's now my belief that we should never just be on a straight shot diagonal ski slope down trying to lose body fat. We should sort of pulse. We should be on cycles because we never want to spend too much time in that significant deficit. It's not good for our mental health. It's not good for our physical health. We should, have different seasons in how we approach these things.
That makes a lot of sense. If you think you're putting some stress on your body to actively try and lose weight, that you're saying you have these other periods of time where you're reversing that and when you're just in a period of maintenance. So it sounds very much like this is something that, and again, it's the opposite of the crash diet. You're thinking very much long term. You're thinking very much holistically. You're getting yourself in the best possible shape to have these pulses, these periods of trying to lose some weight.
Yeah, and I have to say that the periods of reversing into maintenance, they're very mentally challenging on some level, but it's so freeing to literally be able to say, I'm not trying to lose weight right now. I'm not trying to lose weight. I don't want the scale to go down. I'm doing it wrong if the scale goes down, right? Like, I want to maintain. Because for so many of us, I think we've spent our entire adult or maybe sub-adult lives on a diet, on a period of time where we wake up every day knowing that we would feel better if the scale said something lower. And I don't think we're meant to do that. I think chronic dieting is not just physically destructive, it's very mentally destructive. And so having periods of time where you're like, I am eating like a normal person. And when I say normal person, I just want to clarify, I don't mean like a normal person eating a lot of crap. I mean like a healthy person, right? So reverse dieting and maintenance periods, you're eating in a healthy way. And if that's keto for you, you're staying keto. I'm not saying go to town. No. It's just more. You're just eating more. And I think there's real benefit to practicing eating more. And then also, 95% of diets fail. Well, what does that mean? By 3 years out, 95% of people have regained the weight. It's like 70% at 1 year. It's like 85% at year 2, right? It keeps growing. But by the third year after some diet, only 5% of the people are maintaining that weight loss. The majority of the 95% have actually not just regained the weight they lost, but they've gained more than the weight they lost.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so, it makes some sense, even if none of the other stuff was true, it makes some sense that you would want to practice maintenance, because maintenance is what people fail at more than the loss. Now, a lot of us fail at the loss too, but you can just think of it like you're practicing for the rest of your life, how you're going to eat for the rest of your life in these periods.
I think it's just so unfamiliar to a lot of people because they've been in one or other state. They've either been losing weight or gaining weight. I know that's something I swung from one to the other. Right. I was always in one or the other state. I was never in that balanced state in the middle. And so it's something that's just quite unfamiliar to a lot of people. I mean, some people, my father's been the same weight since he was 19 or something. Yeah. There are some people that just maintenance is the norm. But I think a lot of the people who we associate with and who listen to us are the people who've struggled and have been in this seesaw reality most of their lives.
And then if they hit a period, which you could call involuntary maintenance, which is a stall, right? They're maintaining, but they don't want to be. One of the best things I think we can look at is to get on board with what your body is doing, right? If your body is saying, we're not losing weight and we're not gaining weight and we're here, you can kind of figure out what's going on there. And maybe now is a time that you should honor that and say, how do I best utilize this period of time I'm not losing weight to maybe fix some of this underlying fissures in my formulation of the way that I eat?
Yeah, it strikes me that this reverse dieting period, the maintenance period, and I always like to think of stalls more as maintenance or your body taking a bit of a pause, a bit of a rest, but having a reason for that. It strikes me that a good perspective to be looking on this is their periods of active healing. Yeah. That, as opposed to actively trying to lose weight, you're focusing on getting yourself as well as possible, fixing any of those other things that are going on, like you mentioned, sleep and stress and all those other things. You're focusing on your wellness. And that might just, you can't do everything at once. And losing weight takes a lot of energy, doesn't it?
Right. And so one of the things I would like to just draw an analogy, right? If you're in this period where you're really stalled out, I think we've all had the experience of being sick, right? We've caught a cold and we've all done I'm going to take some Sudafed, suffer through, go to work. I'm going to essentially pretend I'm not sick and just hope I get over this soon. And then we've had other times maybe where we're like, okay, I'm sick, and we sort of surrendered to it. And we called in sick to work, and we stayed on the sofa, and we had our cozy jammies on, and we had chicken soup, and we slept, and we took care of ourselves. And we have a choice in that stall period of the former or the latter, right? To say I'm just going to soldier through doing all of the stuff that I've been doing, and I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm just going to keep doing it until something works. And that's the analogy of continuing to go to work and not really honoring the fact that you're sick, and it will take you longer and you will get less out of it, right? We all know when we do that version of having a cold, we're sick for twice as long, and it may turn into a sinus infection, and it's just not good, and it's miserable. Whereas if we're in a stall, just continue the analogy, right? To be what's going on here? Okay, what do I need to do to take care of myself? How can I take this time to really work on some of this stuff and really nourish myself? It'll be much more useful and effective, and you'll come out of it the better.
Yeah, that reminds me of, and I like that. I've heard you talking about it a couple of times. The woodcutter story. Tell me the woodcutter story.
Okay. So this is a Stephen Covey thing. So this is the story's from back in my corporate day. But so Stephen Covey he's passed away, but he's somebody that teaches about effective habits, generally of leadership habits kind of things. But there's this story in one of his books about the woodcutter. So you're walking along in the forest and you come along a lumberjack or, a woodcutter, somebody that's trying to cut down a giant tree. And you pause to watch him for a while, and you're watching him sawing at this tree. He's sawing and sawing and sawing. And after a while, you notice that he's not really getting anywhere, that the tree does not look anywhere near close to falling down. And you notice that the saw is only really like an inch into this giant tree. So you approach him and you say, I'm just wondering, is your saw a little dull? Because I'm noticing it doesn't seem to be cutting through this tree. And the tree cutter says, yeah, I really should sharpen it, so that it works better. But I don't have time because I've got to chop this tree down. I've got to saw this tree down. And so he goes back to work, and like several hours later, he's now 2 inches in, and he's got like maybe 5% into this project, and you kind of ask again, gosh, I think you could probably chop that thing down in like a couple of minutes if you had a sharp saw. Why don't you stop, take the time, and like sharpen it, and then it'll work well? And he's like, are you an idiot? Like, what's wrong with you? I told you, I don't have time to stop because I've got to get this tree down. And so I think you can kind of see the analogy that a lot of us are terrified to quote unquote stop trying to lose weight, right? Because we have a goal. We want to lose weight. And we're afraid that if we take our time to stop putting effort into the weight loss, that something really bad will happen, that we'll never get there. And just like the tree cutter, the reality is, if your approach is akin to bashing your head into a wall repeatedly, maybe that's not the right thing to be doing right now. And you need to stop and regroup and figure out what's going to sharpen your saw, what's going to result in not a short-term win, but actually the long-term win that you're really looking for.
I could take that analogy further, having been somebody who uses a chainsaw. I can attest to the fact it's important to stop and sharpen your chain. But the other thing is, if you keep going past the point where you should stop, you're at very great risk of chopping a limb off.
Well, that's
I've nearly
also
done it so
good
many
to
times
know.
when you get tired.
Right.
So yes, it just, you can see how it all feeds into the same. It's the importance of taking this time to stop and look after yourself and figure out what's going on.
Right. So, I mean, my first chunk of time on keto, I've been keto for a little over 5 years. But if I kind of chunk it down into like the first period of time when I was losing weight, I lost about, 60, 70 pounds over that year and a half-ish, where I was, seeing results. Like, obviously the first 6 months, the results were much faster, then they sort of slowed, but there was still something happening, and then kind of petered out to like not seeing any results at all in terms of fat loss that I wanted. And I wasn't feeling any better than I'd felt. It wasn't like, oh, but I can tell my sleep is better, my this is better. No, I just sort of was like stagnating. That was kind of when I was like, oh, I think I'm stalled. What is this thing? And ended up being stalled for quite a period of time. And then during that period, I actually even started to see the scale go up a little bit, even though I was staying completely keto. But one of the things that had shifted was I was like writing a cookbook at one point. So I was like eating at weird times because I was testing recipes. And so there was some of that going on.
I can remember you playing around a lot with macros as well, being convinced that that was going to be the tweak.
Sure. In the stall period, I was like, maybe more of this, less of that. Maybe I'll follow this lower fat protocol. Maybe I'll follow this higher fat protocol. Maybe I'll do that. I was trying all sorts of things. To see, maybe I can't do dairy. I did carnivore. I went back and forth about a bunch of stuff. Then I finally was like, okay, let's just surrender to this. I had a conversation with my friend Robert Sykes, who is Keto Savage, and he is big into reverse dieting. It's a huge part of his approach, and it kind of made sense to me. And I was like, I'm just going to take this on. So I spent a really long time reverse dieting.
Yeah, because of course he does it for, a very different reason. But
right, he does contest prep kind of stuff.
Yeah, what sort of made that that connection in your brain that you could apply it to, because it's not really a direct application, is it? You're not doing it for the same reasons that he's doing it, but you can see when you think about it how it applies. But what made that connection in the first place?
Well, I guess I didn't think about it quite in those terms. Like, no, I am not a young man with, 3% body fat, right? We are very different mechanisms, but the thing he described about, why he does this and what goes on applies to all bodies, not just people trying to get to sub 5% body fat, which is that you run into diminishing returns when you're eating less and less and less. And I guess for me, I even thought, because he's this high level bodybuilder, I was like, well, if it's true for him and he's a beast in the gym and, lifts for hours and does all these things, like, I was like, well, then it's probably even doubly true for me, right? I don't know I think you think of it the opposite way. Somehow it hit me, which is like, why would I think this would apply to me because I'm just a normal person? Whereas I was like, wow, this would apply a lot to me because I'm a normal person.
Right.
I tend to think people like Robert can push much further in terms of manipulating their body to do things that other people's bodies won't do. I guess I thought, well, if even he is falling prey to this issue, then I really should look at it too. Because a bodybuilder will do seasons, like they all do them, right? Cuts, bulks, reverses, maintenance, right? They go through these phases because they need to add more muscle and they need to not just constantly lose weight. And, so they have different needs and they have to do those seasonally because it's very challenging for your body to do something like lose fat and add muscle simultaneously. It's better to periodize that. It's not that it can't happen, but it's not going to happen as well. It's like if you're trying to do two things at once, your attention is split. It's not as good as if you do one thing at one time.
That makes sense.
And so it was similar. Like, it wasn't the same, but I was like, well, we're both humans, so the general concepts will apply.
And is this where metabolic flexibility comes in and the importance of being flexible?
Well, yeah, I mean, so metabolic flexibility has become a big topic over the past, I don't know how long. Apparently, I live in a place where time is very confusing. But metabolic flexibility, what I think of metabolic flexibility to mean is actually that you're no longer insulin resistant. Because insulin resistance is actually the number one cause of metabolic inflexibility. Metabolic flexibility refers to your body's ability to use either glucose or fat as your fuel source. And if you're insulin resistant, you cannot use fat well as your fuel source. You can only use glucose. Whereas once you become fat adapted and you're healthy and you're no longer insulin resistant, you're insulin sensitive, which is the opposite, in my opinion, you become metabolically flexible. Now, some people will argue that once you go through that period and you become insulin sensitive and you're no longer insulin resistant, you then now want to reintroduce more carbs to get your body more used to eating carbs so that transition is easier. Because it is true, if you've been keto for a long time, very, very low carb for a long time, you do have a slight inability to use glucose as well as fat. They're not equal partners. However, that period lasts a few days to overcome. So it's not a big thing. Whereas, getting over your insulin resistance can last a few years. But some people will argue that a truly healthy person is one who is metabolically flexible and is one who can, at any given time, eat a carbier thing or a keto-ier thing and equally benefit from those different choices and have an equal amount of energy and an equal amount of, satiety and so all those things. The reality is, I think so many of us have built sort of pathways in our body that we never fully, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news here, because I think many of us can, but I think a lot of us suffer if we try and get out of the low carb pathway. Right. I think we know lots of people who did Atkins back in the day, and after induction, you start adding in more carbs, and that was kind of the death of them, right? Like that was the end of their weight loss success. And so I think we have to be really conscious and aware of our carb tolerance if we're trying to add back in any carbs. I don't know that I think that it's a necessary thing. I do think that a metabolically healthy person, one who is insulin sensitive, and that would look like, their blood markers of fasting insulin are very low. They aren't starving. They still don't get hangry. Some of these markers are looking good about metabolic health. Could they potentially afford more carbs? And by carbs, I don't mean Krispy Kreme donuts. I mean, an apple maybe, or a bigger salad. Might they have more flexibility? Yes, they probably do. But I think we focus way too much on the carb part and way too little on the sort of underlying metabolic issues.
Mm. And you've seen that. You've seen increased flexibility in that way, haven't you? Because I can remember back in the early days when you had to be really strict about your carbs when it came to things like broccoli. And I can remember broccoli was your example, that you would talk about the importance of the carb count in broccoli because it did have a big impact on you. You weren't flexible in that way, but now it's not really an issue when it comes to things like broccoli.
Yeah.
Well, not unless you're going to eat a massive, massive bowl, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, that would give me a stomachache.
You're much more flexible with those kind of carbs.
Yeah, back in the day, I was somebody that discovered through ketone testing myself that I had to count total carbs. I couldn't count net carbs, that I was actually very sensitive to carbs, and I would not be in ketosis if I had, I think the number was 29 grams of total carbs, and that was coming from, whole food, natural sources. And then what I've noticed during my reverse diet, I was not increasing the carbs specifically, but I was like, well, in this period where I'm not trying to lose weight, it would be interesting to test my carb tolerance because it was a sort of more level experience of my eating. I definitely had upped my protein. My protein is now more than twice what I was eating back in the day. And my blood sugars are all great and my insulin is great. And I was like, well, now that I've got my protein dialed into where it should be, let's see how my body responds to more vegetables. And lo and behold, I can eat a fairly robust amount of vegetables and still be well into ketosis. And so I could eat in the neighborhood of 50 grams of total carbs, coming from things like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and that sort of thing. And even, an ounce of apple chopped up in my salad, where people are like, oh, gasp, apple. But, I live in a house with somebody who isn't keto, so we tend to have some non-keto type foods in the fridge. And, one day I was like, what if I put a little apple in this? And, no negative effects. And so, I am one of those people that really enjoys vegetables. So I've really enjoyed being able to include them. And so now I don't seem to have negative repercussions from that, but I do still keep an eye on it because I'm not an athlete. I'm not, burning the carbs constantly. I don't have sort of the mechanisms, the muscle mechanisms that are going to just, burn those off in an instant for me. So I do pay attention to it. But thus far, my carb tolerance is much higher than it ever was years ago.
So that really illustrates that long-term plan and the changes that can come about when you just heal your body and put right things that have been, problematic for years, decades. It just goes to show that, you can get some payback in ways like that where you've had to be quite restrictive, less so now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often hear people say, in the net carb versus total carb discussion, I will often hear people say, well, net carbs is easier. If you're new, do net carbs because, it'll feel more, you'll have more freedom, it'll feel easier. And I actually, from a personality, emotional point of view, that might be possibly true. I actually think from a metabolic perspective, you're much better off actually being much more strict at the beginning, going with total carbs, being really careful, because at the beginning of your keto endeavor, you're much, much more insulin resistant, or at least most people. Now, if you're insulin sensitive, you can do whatever you want. But most people are coming into keto very insulin resistant. You have to be much more strict in those places. But eventually, you know, as you're coming into maintenance, maybe have you been doing this for a while, you might increase your carb tolerance over time. So actually, I think that advice is backwards.
Yes, and it actually works quite well. A lot of people have that initial fervor and enthusiasm. So it kind of makes sense to harness that and put the strict bit at the start.
Yeah, totally. And then I think I forgot to say that, because people are like waiting for the punchline, at the end of my reverse diet, I then was able to lose 30 additional pounds fairly effortlessly. I did it in 2 stints. So I did the long reverse. Mm-hmm. I did what some would call a cut, right? I ate less for a while, lost about 15 pounds, went into a shorter reverse maintenance period, then went into another period where I was focused on losing fat, lost another 15 pounds. And now I'm in a period where I'm in maintenance again.
Okay, so who are we talking to here? Who is going to benefit from this structure, this reverse maintenance, and then this active dieting, the cut period? You know, what is this person at home listening to this? They're somebody who presumably is feeling very frustrated. They're doing all the things right. They're not making it up when they're saying, I'm being super strict and I've been keeping to what I'm supposed to be doing, but for some reason I can't lose weight anymore, or I might be gaining a bit of weight. You know, who is it who's going to benefit from this?
Well, I actually think this is good information for everybody, to be perfectly honest, because an ounce of prevention, right? If you started your keto, or you're still in your honeymoon early phase, right, and you keep these things in mind, maybe you won't work yourself into the basement in terms of now you need to fix
that's
something.
That's a very good point.
Right? So potentially, if you're new-ish, you have not yet hit a stall. I know it's really hard for me to say, maybe stop trying to lose weight when you're actively losing weight. Like, I get that feels like an impossibility. But I think looking to saying, well, I've been doing this for 6 months. It's been pretty successful. Maybe I want to pay attention to my macros a little bit. Make sure I'm not eating like at the very bottom of my tolerance. Maybe sort of push it up for a little while. Give myself a bit of a diet break. Take a little time to just practice being at maintenance. I can come back into the dieting again soon. You know, give yourself that time. And then for those people, maybe they'll never develop it as a big problem, right? It's just a pattern instead of a problem. But the people that probably will really hear me and are desperate to hear me are the stalled people, are the people that are not seeing the success they want. And you said it exactly right, even though they think they're doing everything right. Now, if you're somebody who's hit a stall, but you're like hitting the donuts every Wednesday and you keep falling off and on and off and on, you know probably what's going on there. You know the root cause of your lack of success.
I was going to say, you know, I'm that person. Well, I'm not the person who's eating the donuts, but I'm the person who, if I'm not losing weight or if I'm gaining weight, I usually am eating too much. I'm still eating keto, but I'm eating too much of the things that are more at the sort of the carbier end of keto. With me, it's very much the mindset and addictive nature of foods that gets me. But yes, I have those periods of time where I'll inch up a bit in weight, and then I can quite happily maintain on keto, and the kind of keto that feels quite indulgent to me.
Right.
But if I'm honest, I would like to lose a bit of weight and take some of that off. However, it's very comforting for me to know that I can eat quite indulgently and not gain weight.
Right.
That in itself actually is a revelation, because going back 10 years, my eating what I wanted and eating indulgently would have led me to just gain huge amounts of weight in a very short period of time.
So essentially you're doing what I'm suggesting in a just slightly less organized fashion.
Yeah, that's
right?
me. That's usually me. Slightly less organized fashion is a very polite way of putting it. But I like what you said, actually, when I asked you that question, you know, who are we talking to here? And you said, well, it should be everybody. But it made me think when you said people should know this from the outset, and you're absolutely right. But if you said to somebody who came to you, they're interested in starting keto because they want to lose weight, whatever the reason. But usually, let's face it, that's why most people start in the first place. Usually stay more for the health reasons, but they start for the weight loss. But if you said to them, okay, right, here is your weight loss plan, and it's going to involve these 3 stages that you rotate through. This is a long-term process. You're going to have to do this for X amount of time. Yes, the active dieting phase, if you like. But to make that work, to make that effective, you're then going to have to do a period of reverse dieting, a period of maintenance before you can go back into that active weight loss. And those other segments are just as important. And you won't succeed unless you're doing all these things in a cycle. I think if people knew that from the start, they accepted that as part of the process, maybe it would be easier, like you say, and people would freak out less.
Totally.
And you wouldn't see these posts, oh, help, I'm in a stall. What do I do? What am I doing wrong? What have I done wrong? That's always the first question, isn't it?
Right. And it's very challenging when somebody has gotten themselves into a very long stall to get them to unclench their hands from, their ways and, sharpen their saw. And so, as we all know, if you have a saw, I mean, you know better than me because I do not use a chainsaw, but if you maintain it every time you use it and you use it properly, no, you don't have to take it apart and, deal with all the minutia of it being kind of broken down by the time you do maintenance on it. Whereas if you wait to do the maintenance until it's broken, you're going to be there a lot longer.
And it's a great analogy, actually, yes, because because I can absolutely picture that difference. A chainsaw, when it's perfectly sharp, cuts through that log like butter. But if it's not, it's a real struggle.
Right.
Is there, and this presumably depends on the individual, it depends where they are in their journey. Is there kind of a standard time period for these different phases, or does it completely depend?
There is an average. It's about 3 months. So I would say do about 3 months of one, 3 months of the other, 3 months. Now, the reverse is not 3 months. The reverse is just you feeling around in the dark to find the ceiling, right?
Oh, so it's just a case of getting to that ceiling, however long that takes.
Exactly.
Right.
So now, subsequent reverses. So your first reverse, you're really in the dark. Later, when you're doing it again, you know where you were before, so you know where things are. It's a little simpler, but you can kind of look at it as reverse and maintenance are buddies. They always come together. Just as a general guideline, I'd say do 12 weeks of the traditional, what we call diet or cut, like actively trying to lose body fat, and then do about 3 months of reverse and maintenance, and, kind of go back and forth that way would be very useful for a lot of people. That being said, when you first start keto, you might find you're on a roll for 6 months. And I don't necessarily think you have to get off that roll initially. Also, people with more than 50% body fat can probably go a little longer than 3 months on that body fat loss period. This becomes more important as you get lower, which shows kind of evidence that a lot of people will start keto, well above 200 pounds, get down to close to 200, so they'll lose maybe like 50, 75, 100, and then they'll stall out there, right? They've gotten from a place where their body was a little more flexible about how you dealt with it, and then it got a little more crabby. But that being said, I don't think it's a bad thing, even if you're 300 pounds and you are 75% body fat. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to practice maintenance, in the first 6 months at all. I never think maintenance is a bad thing because what we're working on in maintenance are life skills, health skills, making sure our diet is really well formulated, making sure you're getting enough protein, all this kind of stuff. It's not bad to be there. That being said, when we're very, very heavy and it's a life impediment, I get that we want to get that weight down as fast as possible. I'm not against that. So I just want to point out that it can depend. If you're well above 50% body fat when you start, you might have a longer grace period to do that cut, but it's going to happen. That stall period might happen sooner than you think. That being said, there are some people that never stall. They just change the way they eat and they just zoom across the finish line of the weight they want, and they get to a place where they're like, how do you stop this train? Those people do exist too. I'm not saying everyone will have this experience. I'm saying a lot of people do.
So would you say, assuming you're going to adopt this pattern as your new way forward,
Yeah.
and you weren't doing it to a fixed time scale, could you say, right, so I'm in a cut period, I'm in an active weight loss period. Do I just keep going with that until I start stalling? And that's my trigger for, is that...
Yeah, that's dangerous.
I was going to say, is that the point that's too late?
No, that's actually a bad idea.
Right. Because that's going to be the difficult bit, I imagine, for people to get over.
Yeah.
And assuming, there are lots of markers to use, but let's just say we're looking at the scale for the moment and it's going down and you're in this active weight loss period. Great. Everybody's happy. And then it starts leveling out and stall and it's right. Now do I need to start doing something about it? Are you saying that the best time to switch it up is while you're losing weight? Because that's going to be the bit that it's really difficult for people, I should imagine, from a mindset point of view, to stop.
Yep. Totally. It's totally hard. But the rule is never attach it to a number on the scale. So it's never, when I lose 15 pounds, I'm going to do this.
So that's why it's better actually maybe to have a time scale in mind.
You always want to do time, not effect, right? Because it's so easy for us to be like, and then I'm going to squeeze another millimeter of juice out of this thing, right? And no, you don't want to do that. You want to put it on a time scale. Now, the time might be variable. The time might be like, well, I'm going on vacation in July, so I want to end this cut in June. You could do something like that where you're kind of planning it out. Whereas, normally you do 12, but this time you did 11 weeks. It's not that. That's fine. But you want to pick a date to make a shift and then make the shift on that date.
I can see the reason for that. And you're shifting the perspective away from results.
Yep. It's all on actions and not on results. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and your point is a really good one because everyone will do that. I cannot tell you the number of clients that have come to me and have said, I get the theory.
But I'm losing weight. I don't want to stop.
Right. I get, they aren't losing weight. They're like, I get the theory that you're telling me that I need to go through a period of time of eating more before I try to reattempt losing weight. However, I really don't feel like I can do that until I lose another 5 pounds. So first I want to lose another 5 pounds and then I'll do a reverse. And I'm like, no, that's not going to work.
Your saw is blunt.
Exactly.
And what about the people who, the very real fear of gaining weight? What about the people who do actually gain some? You must have presumably come across some people, and I'm assuming we're not talking about much, but people who are really used to focusing in on that. If they gain a tiny little bit, is that the moment that they freak out and lose faith in the process?
Yes. So the first thing I will tell you is you're going to gain a little weight. You're going to gain a little weight. Like I mentioned earlier, I gained 1.5 pounds. You're going to gain a little more weight. There's more food in your system. There's more, it's just going to happen that you're going to gain a little weight, but it should be a little weight. I set a limit for myself at 4 pounds. I notice that I freak out. It goes above 4 pounds. Now, there's fluctuations in my weight that mean sometimes I'm up 4 pounds and sometimes I back down 4 pounds. And so you have to know your fluctuation as well and not factor that in.
Because this is figuring out this ceiling bit, right? So you've got to have the amount that's the ceiling.
If you never gained any weight, you'd never know you hit the ceiling.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So I would say, prepare for a small amount of weight gain. But what we're doing during our reverse is we're being extremely controlled. We're tracking our calories. We're tracking our macros. We're tracking our weight often. Like not just once a week, but maybe a few times a week and then averaging it out, right? We're using a tape measure on our waist to make sure that that's not going up significantly. We really do want to know what the threshold is. We don't want to blow past it. Mm-hmm. But you have to know that you're going to gain a couple of pounds, but you need to trust that you know how to take those off. Now, you shouldn't be gaining 10, 20 pounds. No, absolutely not. That's just counterproductive. Now, some bodybuilder people will gain 10, 20 pounds, but for them, it's a very different situation. But, those of us who are a little more fragile, I would say, it's really like maybe 5 pounds at most. And I definitely have lots of people freak out. So I had a client who, calories were super low, exercise was super high, put her on a reverse. She seemed to be on plan. And a couple of weeks later, I found that she had jumped over to doing protein-sparing modified fats, which is a very, very low-calorie approach. Now, I'm not knocking them, but they don't belong in a reverse, and they don't belong in maintenance, unless in a very specific style. And so she had then gone from averaging 1,100 calories to averaging 600 calories over 3 weeks. And by the time I figured out what was going on, I was like, well, did you lose any weight doing that? And she said, not a pound. So I was like, okay, so that experiment didn't work. Let's come back to the slow and steady rebuilding of your body. And so it's important for us to really be on board. Like, if you're not on board, you can't half-ass this stuff. If you're not on board with taking a slow approach, granted, I don't know what else will work, but, you got to sharpen the saw. But if you want to continue to flail around, and doing things that have thus far not worked for you, you are a free person. I just find that ultimately I want to live an enjoyable and healthy life in a healthy body, and I don't want to just keep eating less and less and less and less to make the needle move lower. I want to do the thing that is sustainable.
And constant frustration is just not a good frame of mind
to be in, is it? No bueno.
And I'm going to ask you, and the answer to this might be, it depends as well, quite possibly. But people are going to want to know, so what about the active weight loss period? What works for you then? And I think actually that's changed, hasn't it? And so that's where the it depends comes in.
Totally.
I don't think there's a set formula for that.
Well, no. So I've done a lot of studying of my clients over the years, and they all do different. I can say there are things that tend to work with more people and things that work with a very small group of people. Okay. But I can't know what works with you because I don't know what group you're in until we go there, if that makes sense.
Yes, no, that does make sense.
So, I do find that the majority of middle-aged, pre- and perimenopausal and postmenopausal women, sort of in that, 40 to 60, 70 age range, anything in there, I find the majority of those women do better once. This is not new to keto. I'm going to say this. So I've been keto for a while. My advice to new people is different. So this is, if you've been keto for a while and you're not seeing the success that you want, those women tend to do better statistically on a slightly lower fat and higher protein approach. That's what I find. And that's what I follow. That being said, I have some clients that don't do well on that are in that age bracket and that, demographic. They do better on higher fat. And so there is some individual variation. And so I usually say, well, start with what seems to be statistically significant. Oh, no, what group of people on average does best? If that's not working for you, that doesn't mean you're broken. It means that's just not the right approach for you. And we have to tinker to find the thing that is right for you. Like, I know you've had people on your show, right, who did Keto AF.
And that was the only thing that worked.
Because it was like the last thing they tried. They were like, nothing else is working. And so there are some people, and I just have to think those people that need to go Keto AF, which I'm sure you can reference the show episode to get people more information on that, but it's in general a very, very high fat approach to keto.
Yeah, it's a 2-to-1. So it's 2 fat to 1 protein. So it's extremely high, actually very difficult to get to that ratio. A real challenge.
But there are a small fraction of the keto population that nothing else seems to work for that does. And so I don't want to be the person out there in the world teaching about keto who's like, it's all about lowering your fat. It's always about lowering your fat. I will say from my experience, I found it is often about that. But it's not always about that. And it's about finding what works specifically for you.
And also, when you're talking about lowering fat, you're not talking about low fat.
No.
This is a keto relative thing. It's, it's not starting to be low fat.
No, I mean, I would say that even on my lowest periods of fat intake, it's still above 60 grams, which is certainly low from keto standards, but it's not low from mainstream dieting standards in any way, shape, or form. And I don't spend long periods of time with it even that low. That's just kind of like, if I think about as low as I've seen it go, that might be as low as I've seen it go.
And that's what's interesting. And that's what's part of the experiment, I guess, right? You know, so when you come round in your cycle to your 3 months of dieting, you try one approach one time and see how it works. And if you find it really difficult to do, you try a different one. Or if you find it's not working very well, you try a different one. This is part of the experimentation, presumably. But I would think anyway that trying an approach for 3 months is quite a good idea, not just sort of chopping and changing every week.
Oh, yeah, totally. You know, you want to give your body time to settle into something. You know, it's like you can't go dairy-free for a week and decide whether or not dairy is the right thing for you. You need to give it a good 60 days to really confirm, you know, that that's working. So I do think you can do some change-ups. You can see what works for you. I've had women go into a period of cutting and realize they're just not in the mental place for it and come out. You know, there's no shame in that. Like, you have to be in the right headspace to want to take it on. It has to feel a period of time where you're like, okay, I'm going to like hop on the fat loss train. You have to be kind of juiced for it. You have to think like, oh, I want to do this. Maybe it's not as exciting as eating as much as I want, but you know, it is exciting because I'm doing something. But you have to be geared up for it. If you've got a lot of stress in your life, if things are chaotic at home, if your health is in any sort of suffering, like, those are not times to take this on. Stay in the maintenance. You got to be like psyched.
I like this idea of doing the different phases for a limited period of time.
Right.
I'm one of these people who gets bored quite easily with something like that. So the idea of changing it up relatively frequently appeals to me. Yes, I think I'm going to play around with it.
Yeah, I got a question from a client once when I introduced this concept. She's like, how is this not yo-yo dieting? And I said, oh, it's so different from yo-yo dieting. Yo-yo dieting is what we kind of talked about at the beginning of the call, which is like eating as restrictively as possible until you can't take it anymore, bouncing to eating as much as possible because you've been so restricted, bouncing again to eating as little as possible. And what's happening in all those phases is you're gaining and losing enormous quantities of weight. And as you do that quick yo-yoing, you're also losing a lot of lean body mass. There's a lot of bad stuff happening. We're doing all of this controlled, calculated, thought out.
That's the key word, isn't it? It's controlled.
Right. You're doing it mindfully. Everything is a choice. There's intention. You know, it's the opposite of yo-yoing.
Well, I've really enjoyed this chat and really encourage people as well to go and listen to your podcast if they haven't already. As I say, I very much enjoy it's my job to edit it, but I really enjoy my job in this case because I enjoy listening to the podcast and find it really interesting. So I really do encourage people to go and listen to it. But where can we find you? And tell us briefly about, so if somebody's been listening to this and thinks it sounds really interesting, they want to know more about it, maybe they want some hand-holding through the process, what can they do to achieve that?
Well, they can find me at kimhowerton.com and on all the social networks at The Ketonist, TheKetonist. That's Instagram and Facebook and all those things. I have actually a program called Keto Unstuck where I teach these concepts to people who are stuck. And if you're listening to this before mid-July 2021, I actually have an upcoming class.
Oh, well, that's very good timing. We're
just very good timing,
just at the right moment.
And you can find that link. If you go to my website, kimhowerton.com, and go to shop, you'll find the courses there. If you're listening to it after, you can hop on the waiting list for that. Just go to the same place and you'll find it. So I will always let you know.
And so how often does that program come up?
Oh, that's hard. It's about every 3 months, but then I take a break in the winter because I'm just going to be perfectly honest. No one wants to start this situation in November. So it's approximately every 3 months, but it kind of depends on what's going on seasonally.
So it works well then. This idea of 3 months is key. But yes, and I've seen how people work with you. It's, you give people that one-on-one advice in the group. So it is something that's tailor-made and specific to the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a group program for sure, but I try and really make it feel individual at the same time because I'm on there on Zoom calls with people in the group because I want to help people troubleshoot and make it work for them.
And help people figure it out for themselves, right?
Absolutely. There's no point in doing somebody else's program. You got to do the program that works for you.
That's right. And the podcast, of course, Keto Life Support.
Oh, right. I have a podcast. My podcast is called Keto Life Support, and there's a link on my website to that as well. And I am on weekly, and the lovely Daisy indeed does help me make that happen because I am a technological nightmare.
Well, it's a great pleasure. As I've said, I really do enjoy it. Well, you know what's coming now, Kim? I did forget to remind you at the beginning. I need a top tip.
All right. You always catch me on these. It's that I forget that I have to come up with a top tip.
You always come up with a good one, though. So
okay, good. Thank you. I'm, thinking on my feet. I would say it is always a worthwhile endeavor to question if your weight loss goals are holding your health goals hostage. That so often you hear the phrase, I came to keto for the weight loss, but I stayed for the health gains.
Absolutely.
But then your weight loss stalls and you double down on the things that don't help your health and just help your weight. So I would say it's always, this is related to what we talked about today, but it's always worth checking in with yourself about your priorities. And are you making sure that your priority is long-term health, which may include weight loss, but you're never putting your health at risk for short-term weight loss desires.
I like it.
That's more of a mental thought tip. It wasn't like, buy milk, whatever. I don't know.
Get a dog, I seem to remember as well.
Yours usually involves getting a dog, your tips. Yeah.
Well, to be fair, that is a very good tip for most people. But yes, and you talk a lot about mindset and behavior in your podcast. A lot of your solo ones are around mindset, aren't they?
Yeah. Being a life coach of some type for over 10 years, I do get, it's nice. The podcast is nice. I can lecture and nobody gets tired of it because they can just turn me off. So it's, imagine you have a bossy friend. That's me.
And you can listen to her every week. Perfect.
Oh, I have a tip. I'll give a second tip. This is one that actually my friends know, not just for me, but it is always appropriate to say to a person, thank you, I'm full. So when people are throwing stuff at you and they're like, and another thing, and you should do this and do that, and you're like, thank you, I'm full. Because there's that moment, right, where you're like, I cannot take you telling me one more thing I have to do. They might be confused by your statement, but, some people understand.
That's another great tip. And that's very practical. I like that. I can see people using that tomorrow.
Your advice has been very helpful. I'm going to need to assimilate that you've already given me before you give me any more.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Kim. It's been a great pleasure as always.
All right. Well, I will hope you have a fabulous, what is it? I don't know. I don't even know what time it is there, but I hope you have a great evening while I have a great day. It
is. You got it. Spot on. Thanks, Kim.
All right, Daisy. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
To get the resources and links from this show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com/episodes. Please share this podcast with as many people as possible by sharing one of my links or just taking a screenshot of an episode that you enjoyed. Reviews really help raise the profile of the podcast, which gets it in front of more people, but also helps me attract a wide variety of guests. So please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast app or platform you like to listen on. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support really does mean the world to me. Thank you. Don't forget to join in the fun on the Keto Woman Podcast Instagram and Facebook pages. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you would like to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. This week's end quote is from Oscar Wilde. Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.